Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Now, listen, I know every time, price goes down, people's sentiment changes because of emotions and because of recency bias and confirmation bias. But I am here to pretty much tell you why I personally believe this is going to be a stepping stone of us moving further up in terms of Bitcoin and then eventually altcoins, right? So, one of the things I always pay attention to is technical analysis, okay? Technical analysis is my bread and butter. I absolutely love and adore it. And I think it always shows the picture much, much earlier than any type of news ever will, right? There's only the few exceptions of certain news events that would literally, if they break a coin, if they're devastating news, then I could see, something happening. Most of the time, technical analysis is already multiple days, weeks, if not months ahead. So, with that being said, let's dive into charts. Why I personally believe, we are creating a higher low to create eventually a higher high for Bitcoin rather than, us failing and going back lower. Okay. So, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things I do want to point out is, we had a very, very similar situation. When this candle here back in 2021, right, we can see we had a nice green candle and then we had like a little bit red and then we kind of engulfed the whole candle over here. We can see that we pretty much ate up the whole price action, right? We ate up the whole price action. These two red candles pretty much filled up the whole green candle, and eventually, we're going sideways below a break of structure on the monthly, right? Break of structure on the monthly. We're going sideways and then eventually we went down. Now, one thing I could compare right away, the one difference is that, ladies and gentlemen, look how weak this candle over here is, okay? Look how weak this candle over here is, right? It is, there's decent selling pressure, there's decent buying pressure, and yes, technically, we're most likely going to end up as a selling candle, but the pressure is very, very, very low. Not only that, if we go to the 3-month candle, we can see how this was a huge rejection back in 2021, right? We had a big, big bullish candle, and it ended up being, right, it ended up being a very, very small buy candle, right? Very, very small, right? And when we compare to this one is more of a, selling candle, right? Rather than a huge buying rejection. This is more of a selling rejection candle. So the context is different, the candles are different, right? Not only is the context different in terms of that we actually broke up recently, so we're retesting to go further up higher while we were already up here going sideways for months before we crashed, right? That is also a very, very important key detail. But, like I said, the candle itself, tells a whole different story. Like I said, the context is very, very important, right? The context is extremely important. We are also literally just consolidating for roughly 7.5 months on top of the support before we blast it off. So, from a technical analysis side, it doesn't make sense for everything just to kind of crash down, right? There's a reason why there was months and months of support being built up. So, we can go higher. And, it makes sense in terms of just simple technical analysis for us to, go like this, something like this overall, to then go like this. Okay. That makes the most amount of sense. And in terms of, structure and a higher time frame, we are, right, no matter what, where price goes, whether it's, the 82K, the 75, the 70K, right, this looks very, very promising, because then we would, create phase number 5, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and usually at 5 is when it resets and it starts going back down to, like 1, and then 2, and then like this 3, 4, right? So something like that usually happens where that's very, very common. Sometimes it could play out a little bit more, right? It could play out a little bit more, it could go lower and then go higher, right? But usually the typical thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then again 1, 2, and then like 3, 4, and then eventually 5, right? Eventually 5. So something like this. So it's just simple technical analysis. It's just in the trading world, it's just kind of common knowledge, right? I gave you so much bias at this current moment of why I believe it is a higher low and not a a sign of reversals, right? Like I said, the key difference here was we were already cycling for months. We already had one altcoin season, and then we had another one, and then everything crashed, right? As everything has to crash eventually. So super bullish, right? Super bullish. You know, the news itself is very bullish, but I know sometimes news is not the most important factor, right? Not the most important factor, because sometimes even though there's good news, you know, things can still cycle out to a bear season. Okay. But yeah, you know, that is one of the reasons. The second reason, ladies and gentlemen, is Bitcoin dominance, right? The thing is with Bitcoin dominance, we are super high. We're at 62%, right? We're at 62%. When we started to crash and die out, you know, the highest we got back up to was like 48, between 48 and 40% when, you know, things started to happen in the bear season, right? We lost a lot of dominance. And now we can see that we have been building that dominance for years now, and which is why also Bitcoin has been going up. We did have a little bit of, you know, a stalemate, I guess. You know, we had this monthly candle right over here, right? It got swept. It got swept. It retested off of this huge, right? Huge support. You know, people thought altcoin season was going to happen earlier. Remember, people thought altcoin season was going to happen earlier because we were going down from 60, like 1% back down to 55%. Okay. But I said there's a very high probability that we are simply just retesting to go higher. And it's the exact same thing, people, right? The reason why you were more calm at the time is because this was actually going in our favor, because this went down, you know, a lot of altcoins went up, and people were thinking, okay, this is it. They were happy, you know, they wanted that confirmation bias. And I was saying, no, you know, it's very unlikely. We're most likely retesting it. And if you really wanted more confirmation, remember I was talking about how this is it, right? This is it. This will dictate whether we go, you know, lower for altcoins or whether we go higher, or whether the cycle continues or whether the cycle is over, right? If we were to go lower here, then we would be melting away. But since we went higher, you know, it was just another confirmation that, you know, we're still continuing the cycle. So next step, right? Next step is getting to these highs over here. Probably a little bit of a sell off, right? We're probably getting like a 2-3% sell off, and then we're probably going to start blasting away again. We probably will be reaching into the 69 to 71% territory before we slam down. Probably will have a big break of structure, kind of like the way we had here, where we, in just a couple of weeks, right, we went from, you know, 70, pretty much 71% to 2 weeks later back down to 62.5, right? So we'll probably get a big slam like that. Most likely have something very similar where we consolidate for a month and a half to 2 months before then we start dumping for roughly 2 months. And that is going to be the altcoin season, ladies and gentlemen, which is why I still believe, you know, we are on track with Bitcoin. Bitcoin still has Bitcoin dominance. It still has way more to go. Bitcoin itself has way more to go. There's liquidity that's going to be coming into the markets. You know, the federal rate cuts are also going to be happening over the next few months, most likely multiple times. So it looks very bullish overall. Do not get stuck on this point. Do not, you know, obviously not a financial advisor, but do not, you know, cash out, you know, just because things are looking bad, because in a month or 2 or 3 months, you will really regret it. So yeah, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.